Hi there. You'll have to excuse my appearance. I've had as bad of a morning as it looks. Anyway, I just wanted to respond to some YouTube videos out there about replacing the power steering rack on, in this case, a 2007 Toyota Tundra four-wheel drive with a 5.7 liter engine. I've had my shop for a number of years, but I was formerly a GM dealership mechanic, so I hadn't done a power steering rack on a Toyota Tundra before. And looking at the labor time guide, they're allowing something like 14 some odd hours to do the job. So I thought, oh, I better have a look. If you look at the Toyota service procedure, what they want you to do is to remove the oil filter housing on the engine with the oil cooler. Remove that, get it out of your way, which necessitates removing the AC compressor and getting it out of your way, et cetera, et cetera. And so I thought I'd see what maybe you guys are doing online. And it seems like every video that I look at, everyone is removing the pinion shaft housing on the rack to get it out of there, and they're trying not to remove the oil filter adapter housing or the oil cooler, any of that. The problem with that, of course, is if you've got a dirty truck like I do here, this is kind of a farm truck that it was their daily driver that's been decommissioned to just be on the farm now. It's pretty dirty under there. And so, to my mind, trying to reinstall that pinion shaft housing and the two lines, the hard lines that go to the ends of the rack in the vehicle, first of all, alignment's going to be a bit of a problem, and cleanliness is definitely a problem. And I don't want to be warranting this rack after the fact or damaging it myself. So, to me, these are kind of a no-go. So I looked around, like I said, and everyone's removing these, and I thought there's got to be a better way. And so what I will say is, what I ended up doing, and I'll switch the camera here and I'll show you. Okay, so here, as you can see, I've got the new rack installed. I've got it bolted down. That's all I've got done right now to this point. Just wanted to show everyone. And you will notice that I have removed the oil filter housing, which connects to those O-rings up there, and it hangs down and blocks a lot of this. I was able to slide the air conditioning compressor out far enough to get at the bracketry and whatnot that's required to take off the oil filter adapter housing. They just, the Toyota manual is very vague. It just says disconnect compressor. It's like, what do you mean disconnect? Unplug the electrical connector or remove it entirely? And it does hyperlink to a procedure to remove the AC compressor, and that is a very large job. You're up on the top of the engine disconnecting coil connectors and all kinds of things on top of removing a whole bunch of stuff on the bottom here. And so fortunately, all you have to do is undo the bolts for the AC compressor and slide it. Is that about not quite 2 inches or so, maybe 2.5 inches. And that gives you enough clearance to do it. Now, the issue with removing this rack is the size of these holes in the end of the frame. So there's your left side, the driver's side, and there's your right side, and these holes aren't quite big enough for that big fat mount assembly. You can see the mount back there, just to the right. Those big fat mounts, right, there it is there, and on this side, there's the big fat mount, and of course the pinion housing, which is behind, it's way in behind here. The pinion housing is way back there, very difficult to get at. And it's quite tall, so I tried a number of ways to, once I got this undone, to move the rack out the passenger side so that I could then bring this outward. And nothing I did seemed to work. It kept wedging on the engine up there, and then the rack housing would wedge right in this gap here. Trying to clear that big fat mount, it would wedge right in here, and it would not allow me to bring the driver's side out far enough to clear the inner tie rod end. And so I've even seen some shops, some guys who are doing this where they're removing the inner tie rod ends to get the thing out. And I don't think I would recommend any of those things. The tie rod ends, I don't think, the inner tie rod ends I wouldn't remove. I wouldn't remove the pinion housing, except to remove the rack itself, the old one. So you can see there's a pinion shaft laying in the oil drain pan there. And if we go to the old rack, you'll notice that I did, in fact, remove the pinion housing. There's the pinion housing with the lines coming off of it. Normally it sits right in there, right? And that makes that stand quite tall. If you look from the mount all the way to what would be the pinion housing, that is too tall to fit through anywhere. So I thought, I do not want to do that. I do not want to remove the pinion housing. So I thought, I better try this with the new rack as best as I can. So what I did do is I fed the rack in from here, from the driver's side. I fed it in through that hole in the passenger side so that I could bring the driver's side up as close as I could. and then I turned the steering rack all the way to the right, and so this was extended quite a bit further than it is now. I measured it so I could get it back to roughly center, which I've done, but it was all the way out here. And that, of course, brought this inner tie rod end as close to the rack as possible. And then, because of the joint on the inner tie rod end, once you get this end close, it's sort of sitting out here. It's poking out this way. And I was able to just, through a process of wiggling and turning a little bit and just holding my tongue just right and getting this end as far out this hole as I could. And again, the problem is it's wedging in here. So you got to fight. The mount's wedging in here and the rack housing is wedging in here, but you're just getting it enough where you can get this tie rod end, this inner tie rod end, not to go in like this into the hole. What I found is you need to make it rotate up and then it falls in the hole. That's the key. Because it's on a spherical joint, the tie rod end is sticking down here, and you can just rotate it up and around and then into that hole, and then boom, the rack is in. And I haven't had to remove the inner tie rod ends, and I have not removed the pinion shaft housing. And I think that's the better way to go, because we're really trying to protect from the ingress of any kind of contamination. And I think I've done that here. The caps are still on the ports, so that I can remove those only when I'm just about to put the hose set on. And then I'll go, of course, go about the business of reconnecting the pinion shaft, the steering intermediate shaft to the pinion, and putting the engine oil cooler housing back on. I've got the new O-rings from Toyota to go back in there so we don't have any leaks, and proceed as normal. So, as I was saying, I don't recommend removing the pinion shaft housing, except possibly to ease removal of the rack, because we're not too worried about preserving the old rack, but we definitely want to make sure we don't damage the new rack. Thanks everyone for watching.